is rolling.
Sounds rolling.
Alrighty.
It's probably better than that.
So, Stephen, welcome back to spend some time with us again. It's been fantastic to have you with us again and
Feels
have
like family.
chance. Yeah, well, it's starting to feel that way, isn't it?
Yeah, it does.
And certainly for us, it's been a fantastic catalyst for our library service to have your time with us and give us some rocket fuel, as I keep quoting, making us afraid in varying degrees, from just a little bit afraid to very, very afraid. Which we started that conversation, of course, some years ago at the State Library Victoria. I think I was looking back on the history of things. I think it was 2008 when we met back there. Anyway, of course, a lot's happened in that time, and what I'm interested...
The iPhone, the iPad, the Apple Watch, a lot of other tablets, gosh.
And the phrase makerspace. I don't think we even heard of that in libraries before 2 years ago.
No, I don't think so. I think with the makerspace we were looking at yesterday was, I think that kicked off in 2008. So that was quite a radical thing then. So,
completely, which I think leads us on to a really important question for us to ask you to reply in a bit of a nutshell, and that is, what are these important international trends that are happening in education and learning that are landing us in these unusual places in libraries and schools, for that matter too?
I mean, I'm in this lucky position of having projects all around the world, and there's a very global markets, they're very global families these days, and you'd think there'd be some sort of uniformity to education around the world. Nothing could be further from the truth, and it's really interesting to look at the trends a little. So I think the biggest split, I think, is probably for half the world they're looking at learning in the broadest sense, the library services, cultural institutions, schools, and they're saying that's an investment, there's our future right there. Where can we find to spend money? Germany in October of last year finally abandoned all their higher education fees completely.
Oh, hallelujah.
Even for international students. And then the other half of the world is saying, we've got technology, and technology's made our shopping cheaper, it's made our cars cheaper, our televisions are bigger and cheaper. Why hasn't that impacted on education? How can we save money? How can we reduce the cost of education? And I think to some extent they're both right. I think if we're going to impact on the 2.2 billion children around the world, most of whom are having a pretty bad experience of learning, we've got to do it affordably, for sure. And we're only going to do it by investing.
And doing more with less.
And doing more with less, So it's a very interesting time. And then I think the second really big trend beyond that is suddenly we're in a world of learning. Turn on my television set, and there are people learning to dance and learning to cook and learning to... In England, I'm learning to sew is the hottest thing on
It is the
TV,
learning age, isn't it, rather than the
learning
industrial age or
absolutely,
whatever else, or technological.
And learning is the coolest thing on the planet, but it's not necessarily very cool in our traditional learning institutions. So I think, having them keep up with the excitement is a big challenge. And the last thing, of course, is the big one, really, that we're facing so much surprise every time you open the newspaper. I wasn't expecting that, and it doesn't matter whether that's volcanic ash, planes can't fly anymore, or somebody drilling for oil in the Gulf of Mexico and can't. Oh, we forgot to learn how to mend the pipes. We knew how to drill and whoops, or just terrorists who are happy to blow themselves up rather than leave the bomb and run away. Things change really quickly, and that constancy of change, that certainty of uncertainty, is a very different thing to prepare for in learning.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things you talk about too, Stephen, is resilience, and I think this is another thing that comes into that conversation, isn't it? Is how are we outreaching and supporting our most vulnerable people in our communities, whether they be children or people of any age.
And one of the big surprises there, of course, are the people that were left out of learning in the age of mass learning. Because they couldn't stand in rows, or they couldn't arrive at the right time, or they couldn't cope with notational form, or it turns
or
out...
indeed they didn't have buildings or
yeah, well,
appropriate,
there's a heap of reasons why they
chairs and
didn't fit what we'd built.
desks.
But it turns out, of course, they're spectacularly valuable because they didn't fit what we built. There have been a dyslexic kid's ability to see the world through a camera's lens in a different way is what makes great cinematography. And suddenly, I go into some of the games coding companies all over the world. They're full of kids who, way down that autism spectrum, and cause their mums no end of worry, and suddenly
Absolutely.
they're worth a fortune.
Well, and not surprising, as you've said, some of our most wonderful inventions and Nobel Prizes, of course, have been won by people who are thinking outside the square and who don't fit into these boxes that we want.
And I'd also say a word here for playfulness and delight. What's the material invention of our generation, and I'm counting everybody watching this, would be, for sure, be graphene. Not carbon fibre. Carbon fibre, pretty cool. Makes good boats, But graphene is going to change our lives, And, a couple of scientists in Manchester University in their afternoon playtime, their Friday afternoon playtime, where, previously their play task had been to see if they could levitate a frog in a massive electromagnetic field. There's iron in the bloodstream. We get a big enough magnet, we can get the little blighter airborne, and they did, and famously won the Ig Nobel Prize for useless research, completely pointless, And the frog, I think, was unimpressed.
Yes, no doubt.
And then the next thing they do, they're peeling a bit of sellotape off a piece of paper, and they say, I've got pencil on the sellotape, and I've got pencil on. I wonder how many times I can do that and still get. And it turned out to be a very large number indeed. And of course, that was a spectacularly thin layer of graphene, and blow me down. Their play has changed the world forever.
And this is an extraordinary concept, isn't it? And I guess my next question around that, which I would like to pose, is sort of the so what question, which is around not just in terms of large-scale, big difference technological revolutions, if you like, in terms of that example you gave, but about strengthening communities. If we come down to the grassroots again for a minute, how can play and learning strengthen communities, do you think?
Well, straight off, I think we need to remind parents and grandparents, both,
The great grandparents.
You need to remind them to allow children to be children, and to let them play, and be a little naughty, and to surprise them. Children who don't surprise you aren't going to surprise the world,
yes.
And they're not going to be much good, and I think people want their kids to be grown up too quick and too early. And one of the nice things about social media and connectivity is kids are being quite childish with each other in a way that they weren't being.
So are adults, I might add.
Yes,
having had a lovely little exchange with you this morning in the same kind of vein.
Well, we had my favourite library here. We were.
Can we just quote that again? Library at the Dock, Stephen's favourite
library. Of course,
library.
The library at the docks, I love. How could you not love books, boats, what's not to like?
Good coffee.
Good coffee, well, And we were having a conversation here last night, which was just delightful. People didn't want to leave. But there were two conversations going on. There were a group of us on the stage chatting about, whatever questions came from the audience, and a really vibrant conversation going on in the audience on Twitter, and people joining in from Scotland halfway through. It was just delightful. And very playful and quite childish in moments,
Wonderful.
and genuinely useful.
Yes.
Genuinely useful.
So do you think it's that, because what I'm hearing you talk about is social learning almost now, so is it about the way in which we set up learning environments to be social, in fact, that actually is the core to this question of how do we strengthen communities through playful learning? Is that actually the nub of this?
I started teaching 1974. These are lines here, and that was the kind of the peak of numbers in England. We'd had the post-war baby boom. People came back from the war, started breeding, and we just didn't know what to do with all the kids. There were so many kids. I think 1972, famously, England opened a new school every weekday for the whole year. It's kind of hard to get your head around, isn't it? That sort of, and they all had galvanised metal windows, and you walk into them, turn right, you always found the toilets and so on. They were
provision. Yeah.
But it sort of didn't matter because the jobs that people were doing, they were going into typing pools and copy typing letters, or they were going into Fords and banging hubcaps on the side of the car, and somebody was doing the other side, but they never talked,
Yeah, so it kind of worked for the world we lived in at the time.
The bell rang, they stopped, it's lunch, you go to the toilet when the other bell rings, and that sort of, that sort of mechanistic learning kind of did all right. But of course, those mindless tasks are done by robots now. If I look around Melbourne, what are the tasks that have disappeared from the economy? We've still got unskilled labour. We've still got people doing stuff. I've just down the road, just round the corner, sanding a boat down yesterday, and it's just flipping hard work with a bit of sandpaper. He couldn't do it with a machine, and we've still got skilled labour. I take my car in now, they plug in a laptop, and there's a guy with, it's highly skilled staff, and we've still got skilled clerical work. But we haven't got any unskilled clerical work at all.
No, it's very highly nuanced, isn't it?
If you wanted to sit about, the only place you'll ever see it now is in schools. Kids all sitting in rows doing worksheets. Is getting them absolutely ready for 1950.
Yes. Let's go back in time, shall we?
But not much else, What is it they say about worksheets? If you give a kid a worksheet and they can't do it, why did you give it to them? If you give them a worksheet and they can do it, why did you give it to them? It's either which way. It's
a riddle, isn't it? Yes, mindless riddle indeed. So coming to really digital learning at the core of what I think really underpins your approach to learning and facilitating this kind of new learning, if you like, for the world we live in. How important is digital literacy in regard to both informal learning and formal education sectors now, do you think?
Yeah, I mean literacy always matters. And, let's start with books. I think the time people don't pick up some books in some forms are fabulous. The novel is gorgeous. How would you? I can't imagine sitting in a bath reading on my phone. It's going to end badly.
Doesn't quite work, does it? As you say, it's going to end badly.
No.
And in fact, just on that note, I think there is no other psychological state, it's said, that we can achieve in terms of flow in our minds.
It's all, and it's all the cues and clues of the book, of the, when you want, you can't remember what page you put it down on, you flick through, you recognise the shape and form on the page, you recognise the patina of wear, all those things. And, I was talking to the authors of teenage fiction, and, they're writing the book in the pagination on their screen that it will be printed on the page, because they know that down in the bottom right hand corner the last two lines have got to be a page turner, or the teens won't turn over, And of course a lot of that gets lost in digital format, because I can have any text size I like and the pages are all over the place. On the other hand, encyclopedias are rubbish as books. I mean, they're just, everybody with well-to-do parents had a row of encyclopedias and they never picked them up. And was it Terry Nation from the Doctor Who thing who famously got the word Dalek from the DAL to LEK volume of his encyclopedia?
That's too funny.
He never opened it, but the spine was great. Oh, that's probably apocryphal. But, and suddenly they work really well online. So it's horses for courses, and that means we've got to be adept at all those things. Young children have got to know the difference between a selfie and a landscape, got to know the difference between an email and a text. They've got to know when they're annotating, when they're originating, and they've got to know that as early as possible. Those early years when you're building those little taxonomies of understanding in your mind. I meet parents who say, I'm not going to give my kid a phone until they're 9 or 10. Well, you're holding back crayons? Why would you do that? You give them crayons and Play-Doh and every damn thing early and help them to make those judgments. And when you give them that technology really early, they'll put it down for a week and go and play outside, you know.
Yes, it's
when you totemise it and say you can't have it till you're 9, you try getting their fingers off, and they'll put everything else down in favour. So, you know, of course, if we're going to have literacy, we've got to have the broadest possible definition, and fundamentally that means if you're going to be able to critique the stuff in front of you, you've got to be able to construct it so that you might deconstruct it, and that means being an author, being a contributor, being a critical reader, all the things that we've cared about with books and cared about with media, we've got to care about with absolutely everything.
Absolutely, and I think it speaks to the heart of some of the issues that we're grappling with in public libraries on that note around supporting the creation of content. And of course that includes mashing up existing content and all of those issues around IP and you know, copyright and where do they sit and
those are not necessarily new issues. I mean, you know, people have been collaging cut-out artwork and hanging it in the Tate in London or wherever, you know, for a long time, and you know, and stealing, you know, sentences and phrases, and you know, of course that's what's happened. But there's something bigger in all this, and it's about valuing. It's about valuing the contribution and the form. Yes. And you know, I mean, Dickens, for example, was writing, you know, episodic stuff, and every chapter hangs on a cliffhanger, and you can't wait for the next episode in the sort of Penny Dreadful magazine, or whatever it's going to be. And you know, it feels all a bit full on when you put it in a book. You know, so you know, being creative in the appropriate form is a real challenge, and you know that. I mean, if we look at poetry, for example, you know, poetry with shape. I'm thinking of Herbert's Easter Wings, you know, or you know, Mouse's Tale in Alice in Wonderland, or Brian Patton's what's his poem about the boat, which of course is close to my heart. It looks like a boat, you know, writing in a shape and form. Poetry has been an art form for a long time.
Indeed.
But suddenly it's more accessible, we can all do it, and how do we value it, and how do we celebrate it, and how do we exhibit it and share it and critique it and curate it? It's a big challenge.
So this is a real opportunity, I think, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about the role of public libraries in that space particularly, and what public libraries can be thinking about in the broader sense around those particular examples you give, and also, you know, broadly in the digital literacy agenda.
Yeah, I mean, it's the challenge. The challenge is to have horizons wide enough. You know, my digital literacy would sure as heck include number. And libraries are short on number. You know, Dewey Decimal.
Notwithstanding, which of course in this library you don't see a lot of, and in our Southbank library you don't see it at all.
Thank the Lord for that. But you know, number is an important part of our literacy, and you know, and we need new librarians. We need people who care about number and science too, and computer science, and so on. So keeping the horizons wide is tough, but of course, as soon as you make the horizons wide, you have to be selective.
Yes.
You kind of sort of have to be selective. I mean, you could imagine Melbourne itself being a library. I could certainly imagine Melbourne being a campus, so why can't I imagine the whole thing being a library? And I can see the function of library dissolving into, you know, the commuter trains and into the, you know, into the botanic gardens, and you could imagine it dissolving all over the place.
And I remember you using this phrase in a conversation we had before, Stephen, about Melbourne, the possibility of a library city rather than a city library, because of course we've got that on our agenda at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, if I was to choose the number plate byline, it would probably be Melbourne, the city of learning, you know, because you know, I think libraries are about learning. I think families are about learning. Certainly, schools and universities are about learning, and let's hope politicians are about learning. I think they are, you know, can be. And, you know, there's the first city to bag that title for themselves, I think, will lead the world.
Which is interesting, because I know that in our goals for the city, we certainly articulate ourselves as a knowledge city and a smart city. Yeah. So I guess it's sort of, it's getting there.
Knowledge has that sense of being a repository.
Yes.
Learning has a sense of being a contributor to the repository and an interpreter of it and a critiquer of it.
And I think that is, again, a fundamental difference in terms of the question I was asking earlier about how do we strengthen communities. And of course, when we do things to communities or we put things on community, then, you know, it's a bit like providing knowledge or providing something. But in the context of how you're putting that, it is about that beside people, you know, with and beside them.
Yeah. And we've never had the tools before that we've got now for cementing collegiality and mutuality and, you know, peer critiquing and all, you know. My mother was an inveterate letter writer, you know, and I'd go to visit her quite often, really. She's only just down the road, and she'd tell me what was happening to all these sort of miscreant members of the long extended family and her worries and hopes, dreams for them all, you know. But now I know, you know, on a daily basis, really, who's, you know, which niece is snogging who, and, you know, where they're studying, and, you know, who's weeping, you know. And I know all that, you know. So we've got the tools of community, but how do we make mutuality out of that? How do we build community respect? How do we value the cultural nuances of that long timeline of history, you know? And nowhere longer than here, you know, 3,000 years of caring about history is really interesting. There's not many places this side of Babylonia, you know, they've got that kind of history of learning.
30,000 years, in fact, if we of course look towards our indigenous
well, that's where I was
culture and
that's
history.
where I was looking around, you know. I hadn't really got my head around how far back.
It's like phenomenal, isn't it?
Even older
I think
than
it's
me.
even older
you know.
than that, in fact, if we put the numbers on it, in fact.
Yes.
And speaking of which, I mean, you are visiting with us as the International Knowledge Fellow supported by the International Specialised Skills Institute. I'm interested because we know that you travel the world all the time. You know, you spend, I think, only a little portion of time at home each year.
Sailing season.
Yeah, so how are we going, you know, in your view? How are we going in Melbourne, but also how are we going in Australia, because you do travel extensively on these really important topics. I'm interested to know where you think we're sitting and what you'd be suggesting that we be really focused on.
You know, there's a trite answer and a long answer. I'll give you the trite one first, which is I wouldn't be sitting here if you weren't doing well, you know, because I've only got so much time in my life, you know, and so there's progress, you know. I see, as people watching this will see, I see kids coming home from school smiling. I see kids going to school not afraid. So that immediately puts you ahead of half the world, you know, because your schools are safe and nobody's bombing them. I was talking to the education minister from Kurdistan a few years back, who's a lovely girl, and I said, in the design of your schools, what matters most? And she said, well, from the air, they mustn't look like military installations. And you knew, well, of course, hasn't she been proven to be right? So you know, you've got happy kids enjoying learning mostly, and that's precious. I think the hard things are to trust your kids to go as fast as they can possibly go, and that's terrifying. I mean, every parent will tell you that children going quicker than you expect is a scary, you know, like 13 is a terrifying time. You know?
Amazing we survive it, those of us who are parents of older adults, younger adults.
Yeah, they all seem to work out pretty good. I'm proud of mine, you know. But there are lots of places in the system where we're saying to kids, would you mind just waiting? People watching this will remember being told by a teacher, maybe when they were at school, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but you're not supposed to know this till next year, but I'm going to tell you anyway, you know. You went, ooh, yeah, I got the secret knowledge. And why wouldn't the system allow the brakes off and to see, you know, Australia's a very wealthy country, Melbourne is a spectacularly stable, wealthy and young city, you know, average age is 29, so, you know, for most people here, they're going to still be living at 129, so they've got a century of learning ahead of them. And the question is, how good might that learning be?
Absolutely, and I think... Oh, sorry, go
Well,
on.
I was going to say, I think you shouldn't be constrained by the rest of the world today.
Yes.
You should say, let's just see how fast and how good our kids can be. As you've done in sport, goodness knows. Have you done in culture? Goodness knows. Well, take the brakes off learning, see how fast and far they can go, you know.
And I think this is the real challenge for us in public libraries, isn't it? Is to really think about how do we not throw the baby out with the bathwater, you know, and keep the best things about libraries and what they're so good at in terms of, you know, the perpetuation of history and culture. But also, how do we foster this sort of engagement, excitement, enrapture with learning, and I think this is a real
So
challenge.
I'm an early bird. I get up real early. I can walk along the riverside. You know, there are kids out there rowing at goodness knows how early. You know, they're getting ready now. There's the championships coming up over in New South Wales, so they're up. 5 there. They're out there. I go down to Adelaide and Glenelg Beach on a Saturday. There was a wash with kids who are out of school who are, surfing and zip catting and goodness knows what else. Everywhere I go in Australia, there are people pushing the boundaries of what they can do in their cultural opportunities, and really that's what libraries are. Libraries are that potential accelerator for learning. Schools struggle to move fast enough, but this should be a place that's full of people pushing the boat out. And when I first came into this building, it just barely opened, and I talked to some guy just sitting down on this floor actually, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm kind of getting myself back together a bit," which was a nice reply, And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm being regular. I'm coming in here regularly, and soon I'm going to hope to do some courses, and really going to." And you could feel the acceleration in his life, which was pretty broken.
Well, the other thing I hear is hope in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that just seems to be such a lovely capturing of that little moment. Is acceleration, but hope.
Yeah.
Hope for a better future.
But if we'd have taken him and sat him back into a school, made him sit in a row and face the same direction,
Would have drained out of his body
all the things
3
that
seconds.
That's probably what went wrong in the first place,
Yes. Yeah.
When I used to look after the huge number of children each year who've been thrown out of school, I mean, when you got down to talk about it, and you don't get expelled lightly from school, so things had gone wrong, but it was always tracking back. There was a moment of profound humiliation. Somebody that said, "That doesn't happen in libraries." Those kids would say to me, "When you're 15 and you're big and you're black, you walk into a library, it's the one place in your life where people's eyes don't follow you with suspicion. It's the one place you're trusted to be yourself and accelerate yourself." That's special.
Incredibly powerful, Stephen.
And that accelerator and that hope and that delight, But you probably need to add a bit more playfulness, because libraries are very tidy places,
Absolutely.
And,
yes.
I think if there were a couple of drones cruising around here now, it would be all to the good,
Indeed, and I think that's exactly the point at which very nice sort of place for us to finish in a way, because I think that is the great challenge for us in public libraries in terms of the architecture, but the way that we set our physical spaces up. Librarians are very used to keeping things orderly. Dewey is a beautiful example in a nutshell of that. And I think we are going to be challenged in meeting this kind of playful, agile innovation space.
Participative space,
Yes.
where 30% of the content are created by the community, and they're and also connected. The sense that here I am, I stand here and I look at the boats coming in outside, and there are boats there that are clearly on world cruises. They've come in here, they're covered in solar panels. They could do with a bit of tidying up. They're off around the world. How do we get the sense of this place being a lens that brings the best of the world here and focuses the world on the best of Melbourne going out? How do we build that kind of lens of playful transparency? I think is a big challenge. But you know what? We've got the technology to do it. In our hands, in our pockets, on our wrists, on our eyes, everywhere.
And
we can't do it now. I don't know when we can.
And I think that point you make too is that it's not all about big bucks. Even though we were just talking about yachts, I think in terms of actually what we can do in our libraries, it's not about having to spend a lot of money, even though the wearable technology, yes, it does cost money, but the cost of these things has de-escalated enormously.
And I mean, if Australia is going to use its wealth and stability to help the world, it mustn't cost big bucks. If you go out onto the pontoons, there's really big, really shiny yachts. Haven't been anywhere in a month. The slightly scruffy ones that have got slightly unexpected little bits of rope work on them and some little playful, and an owl hanging from the boom. They've been right round the world,
Yes.
And
they're going somewhere.
And they're cheap.
And they've been somewhere.
And they're cheap and cheerful.
Yeah, indeed. That's fantastic, Stephen. Thank you so much. I think that it's given us some amazing, I think, both challenges and also affirmations in the work that we're getting our heads into in terms of the public library space that we need to be working in these years to come. But now, and I think this is one of the things that you've really put a rocket fuel into the thinking that those people that meet you in the public library sector are really trying to grapple with, and not being too afraid, but actually.
But what a team! Because when I talk to the folk here, nobody does this. They all do this, and that you could not ask for better.
Absolutely.
For me, talking to groups is like watching the sun come out. People's faces light up. It's why I'm here.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and it is making a huge impact on our service in particular, but I know for public libraries in Victoria, and I know wherever you go, that's the kind of impact it has. So
Thanks.
Thank you so much from us. And,
folk watching this, if it makes the edits, be brave.